My name is Darren Evangelista. I'm a senior content marketing lead here at Quorum. And for those who are unfamiliar with Quorum, Quorum allows you to get information and execute strategy all in one place. And we are lucky enough to be joined by the fine folks at Axios Pro today. Axios Pro provides real-time policy analysis across three key sectors: healthcare, tech, and energy. And we've partnered with Axios Pro to bring hyper-relevant congressional policy news and Quorum's industry-leading government affairs tools together with the Quorum platform to create premier policy news and software solution. So before we meet the experts from Axios Pro, I'd like to welcome Zeke Smith, one of our sales engineers and Jeopardy extraordinaires at Quorum, for a short preview of how Axios Pro and Quorum work together to streamline your work. Take it away, Zeke.
Thanks for the intro, Darren. We'll save the Jeopardy questions for another webinar, but for the time being, I did want to take a moment to show our audience exactly how Axios incorporates into the Quorum platform. For those who may have questions about that, let me see if I can share my screen. I think I would know how to do this by now. All right, and hopefully you all are able to see what I'm looking at. So this is what Quorum looks like on the back end. Darren already gave a little bit of context for why we really wanted to incorporate Axios the way that we did. And that's because we find that professionals work best in the GA space when they have both information and they're able to execute on that strategy in a single place. So you see here that on Quorum, we have a documents data set, which really encompasses a wide variety of sources that helps you get information on what's moving on the Hill, how to make decisions about where you need to put your time. That documents data set includes everything from press releases, floor statements, statements in committee hearings, social media posts, a variety of different White House documents, legislative and regulatory documents. But we also incorporated Axios Pro into that same feed because we want you to be able to find those Axios articles right alongside of those other official documents that are coming out. So when I go into Quorum and I have my Axios news articles highlighted here as sort of my filtering capability, you can see that we already have almost 4,000 Axios articles within our system. All I have to do is type in, let's say, a couple of keywords here that I may be looking for across a number of Axios articles, and it's pulling up every Axios Pro article that includes the words artificial intelligence in it. I can parse through where these articles are actually coming from, what vertical they are. I can even see some of our esteemed panelists have authored these very articles. And then if I want to, if I see something that is hitting particularly, an item of interest for me, I can click into an individual article, see the terms that I search for highlighted in particular snippets here, or I can scroll down to the very bottom, read the entire text of the article, including other areas in which it intersects with other Axios articles. And the real key here in the way that it integrates with Quorum's software is that if there are pieces of legislation that get mentioned in the article, those automatically get indexed as well. So I can look and see, yes, this article is about the House advancing 2 AI bills. There are also a number of other pieces of legislation historically that are mentioned in the particular article. And so I can go through and look at any of those individual bill pages directly from that Axios article. If I click into a bill page, likewise, after I look at where the status is, what committees it's coming out of, who the sponsors and co-sponsors are, any of that pertinent information, I can also go through the documents data set and see every document associated with that particular piece of legislation to include Axios Pro articles. Then there are also tweets, statements in committee hearings, and you can really synthesize all of that information in one place so that you figure out how you need to move next. So we're really grateful for the the integration, our exclusive partnership with Axios Pro, and we've been hearing from a variety of clients that it's been working well for them.
Thank you
Back
very
over to you,
much,
Darren.
Steve. All right, now let's meet the members of the Axios team. We are joined by publisher Nick Johnston, tech policy reporter Maria Curie, energy and climate policy reporter Daniel Moore, and last but not least, we have healthcare policy reporter Victoria Knight. Nick, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Darren. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here with my all-star crew of reporters. I think we'll kick it off a little bit with some of our big picture views of the post-election lame duck and early 2025 landscape on each of our verticals. And then we're going to definitely dive into these questions, which are already filling up. So let's start. I think, I don't know, who's first on my family squares, right? Daniel, you want to kick it off from your energy climate viewpoint? What's your big election reaction? Big picture.
Sure, big picture. Yeah, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it. So it's good to talk about these issues. The thing that really jumped out to me most was just how much the messaging around the Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure law and some of these big pieces of legislation never really move the needle in the election cycle. I mean, I think much of the oxygen was taken up by immigration, abortion, culture war issues, assassination attempts, things like that. And with Biden stepping down, Kamala Harris really didn't get a chance to talk that much about climate change, and she didn't talk that much about climate and energy policy beyond, talking up her role in passing the deciding vote for the IRA when she was vice president. So I don't know. I think, now that you have a Republican trifecta, you're likely to see, especially in Congress, you're already starting to see moves to work on a reconciliation bill around tax policy that's going to target some of these IRA tax credits that have already, kind of incentivized the private sector to announce projects. You're highly likely to see a full-scale repeal of the IRA, but given much of the law is embedded in a lot of these local communities, conservative districts as well as Democratic districts, and you're seeing a lot of these, communities start to see job creation and economic development from the law. So you're probably not going to see a full-scale repeal. But you will start to see movements on the Hill, beginning in lame duck, and in the next session to.
Well, don't scoop yourself just yet. We'll get to that in a second. And so, big election picture though, not really a front and center type thing, except for Kamala Harris, of course, claiming that she was now for fracking before she was against it. Kind of speaks to the broader trend.
She moderated herself for sure.
Yes.
On those issues in this election cycle. Yeah.
Victoria, what was your big picture healthcare takeaway from the election?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Democrats were really hoping that abortion rights would bring people out to the polls. We're really counting on that. I mean, if you look at Harris's messaging on healthcare issues is mostly focused around abortion rights. She was tapped by Biden before she even became the presidential nominee to be kind of the person on abortion rights. And, as a woman, as a mother, like that was very important to her. And so she talked about that a lot. And I think Democrats really thought in the 2022 midterms, it really brought a lot of people out, and it was a strong message. And I think they were hoping for that this election cycle, and it didn't seem to quite turn out that way as much as they expected. Or it was also like, maybe it was an issue people did care about, but it wasn't their top issue. Really, I mean, overall, I think we all kind of seen that like economics and immigration are really the two big drivers for a lot of those undecided voters. And abortion rights mattered a lot to Democratic voters, but not so much to some of those more undecided. And I mean, Harris did have some healthcare proposals. They were mostly, we kind of viewed them as like building on what Biden had done. So it's kind of just expanding the Medicare drug price negotiation program to include more drugs and also, kind of make the timeline a little quicker. She did have a new proposal that was kind of interesting, which was like, allowing Medicare to pay for at-home care. So that's basically, older people who, need to get taken care of at home. Medicare doesn't cover that right now, or they only do in like very certain situations and for a short period of time. So I think she was hoping that would appeal to people as well. But I'm not sure we saw a lot of that. I mean, I think it was other issues dominated, and healthcare outside of abortion just wasn't a big part of the election conversation.
Got it. Siemens Energy kind of on a back burner. Maria, what about your take from the tech world?
My big takeaway was that AI was not as big of a deal as I think we all thought it was going to be. I think going into the election, we all thought that deepfakes were going to be a lot more destructive, but there were only a few major examples. Like we all remember Donald Trump putting a video of Taylor Swift on his website, claiming that she was supporting him. There was also a Kamala Harris video that Elon Musk then retweeted. But other than these like big moments that no one really bought in the first place anyway, AI was not as disruptive. I think it's because people can tell it's fake. That doesn't mean that it's not going to continue being an issue that lawmakers watch out for future elections, but that was one big picture surprise thing where I was like, I thought that was
my favorite one was the Elon Musk and Donald Trump dancing.
Yeah.
Which was clearly fake. All right, let's pivot to the rest of the year. And Maria, let's start with you. Like, what's going to happen in the lame duck on tech AI stuff?
I had one source tell me that it's going to be one of the most unproductive lame ducks in a minute. I mean, lame ducks are unproductive in general, but we started out the year with a lot of really big, lofty AI goals, privacy goals to protect kids online. A lot of that is going to go away. I think right now it's really at the leadership level that negotiations are happening for the NDAA, and we're going to see some smaller, like low-hanging fruit AI bills get attached to that. Things like, the Create AI Act to fund the National AI Research Resource. But if you want a more detailed list of the specific bills that could make it in there, I would look at the House Science Committee, the list of bills that they passed out in September. And the China Select Committee also passed a bunch of bills during China Week in September. And those are really the ones that are at play. During the lame duck, we also checked in with House Majority Leader Steve Scalise recently, and he is very interested in getting some sort of export control legislation through before next year. And so I think the common wisdom is like, why would Republicans want to agree to anything when they can just wait until they're in control next year? But this is one area where I could see some action, is export controls.
Victoria, what's your read of it for healthcare?
So, echoing Maria, I think it seems likelier that we'll have not much happen, or only kind of the essential things that have to get extended into next year will happen. So for healthcare, that means there's a couple of things that have expiring deadlines, either December 20th or end of the year. So that's community health centers. There's also Medicaid dish payments to hospitals. There's also Medicare telehealth flexibilities that will be expiring that, committees have already done work, both Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means in the House have already passed legislation that would extend those for 2 years. I've heard some people say that it may be more like 1 year, but that's definitely something. They don't want seniors to have their kind of telehealth flexibilities taken away. So I think that'll definitely get done. But there has been, in this Congress, really PBMs have been the big thing everyone's been talking about, and there was hope maybe that be included in a lame duck package, some kind of PBM reform. It also can help be a pay for, depending which PBM reform you put in there. But I don't know, that's seeming maybe less likelier if it's really just an essential package of like, here's these expiring deadlines, we have to do these things, but maybe nothing else, because Republicans kind of want to be able to have their say next year on everything. And also it seems like, incoming President Trump maybe want his say also. So
yeah. And when you mentioned PBMs, that reminds me of what we talked about when we did this for pre-election. If there's one thing everyone agrees with on healthcare, that they hate PBMs. Is that still the case? They are on the bad part of the hamster wheel in the convoluted metaphor we created in the fall, correct?
Yes. So do you want me to explain the hamster wheel
Yes, help
metaphor?
explain why PBMs are on everyone's bad list.
Okay. So it's something that someone told me once, and it makes a lot of sense for healthcare, at least. It's basically different industries take their turn on being the ones that, Congress wants to either regulate or kind of crack down on. And so I envision it as a hamster wheel. It's like whose turn is next for Congress. So, with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Medicare drug price negotiations, pharmaceutical companies are the ones kind of hit. And so I think this latest Congress kind of let them take a break. They're in the back of the wheel. And so PBMs were the next one up. And I think next year I'll talk about, I guess, a little bit later, but like I kind of see hospitals as another one on the wheel
looking
behind
ahead.
PBMs. So that's kind of how I envision the hamster wheel. But yes, that is the one thing that both sides seem to agree on. Both Republicans and Democrats are let's crack down on PBMs. Let's do some kind of reform. The House has been really big on that this year, and the Senate has also done quite a lot of things. And so I think that there's hope that could be attached since both chambers have really worked on it. But I definitely think it's something next year that we could see traction as well, and have some Dem support even in a Republican trifecta. So
yeah. Daniel, who on your beat, before we get into the lame duck, who does everybody hate or who does everybody love?
I think in the new Congress, you're going to see everyone target electric vehicle manufacturers and the electric vehicle tax credit. That seems to be everyone can agree that that is vulnerable to repeal, or at least changing that in some way to change the scope of it, to limit the scope of it. Yeah.
What is your what's on your lame duck to watch list?
Well, we've got a permitting reform proposal. This would kind of overhaul the way that energy infrastructure and other infrastructure is permitted in the country. What's interesting is that this has been a bipartisan effort in the Senate. There is a bipartisan bill that was voted out of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in July that hasn't moved since then. On the House side, there's been a GOP proposal that is just really looked at NEPA, the environmental review law that governs that process, and Democrats haven't signed on to that. So we're kind of stuck in this limbo, and most folks that we've talked to have been pessimistic that there's a chance that could pass in lame duck. Stranger things have happened. I mean, we've talked to lawmakers as recently as last week who have been having talks about this in the House and in the Senate. So it remains a priority, and you have, certainly the energy industry pressing for this, but it's such a delicate compromise, and Republicans really don't see, as Victoria Maria mentioned, an incentive to get this done in lame duck, and we'll probably punt it until the next session. So we are watching out. There are some other bills floating out there that touch on, geothermal permitting. That's one aspect of the bipartisan bill that could actually get pulled out and passed on its own. So we'll be watching for anything that could be pulled out from that bill and get enough bipartisan support to pass in the lame duck. And then there are just, other kind of amendments that could be placed as part of the NDAA and the Defense Authorization Act. There are some things, involving abandoned mine remediation, small scale stuff like that we'll be watching for in the energy space. But for the most part, it's going to be a pretty lame duck, as one of my sources.
So your analysis is similar to what the source told Maria, that there's not going to be, don't get your hopes up on anything sneaking onto the NDAA.
That's right. That's right.
Well, then spin it forward. Talk to us about 2025. Like, what's your watch list on the Hill for the new Congress?
Yeah, so under Republican control, you are going to see, and you're already starting to see, a lot of movement towards a reconciliation bill to extend the Trump 2017 tax cuts. And so from our perspective, we're looking at, anything that would have been in the Inflation Reduction Act that could be used to pay for an extension of those tax cuts. So, we've been told last week, we talked to some GOP lawmakers that, basically everything is on the table at this moment. The talks are still very early, but they're hoping to have a bill passed as soon as the spring. And so, we're looking at things like, again, the EV tax credit, which President-elect Trump has really targeted during his campaign. We're looking at, things like, tax credits that may not be totally repealed, but may be limited in scope or changed in scope, things like 45X, which incentivizes clean energy manufacturing. That could be a boon for mining instead of other things that help, other industries. And so we're very much focused on the tax conversation, just because it relates so much to the Inflation Reduction Act and things that the Republicans could try to roll back.
Beyond that, what is your broader sense? You touched on this a little bit at the start on the prospects for the IRA. And pre-election, we talked a lot about the House Republicans who were already writing letters to defend it. What do you think the mood is going to be around the IRA next year? A lot of talk or actual action on it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the margins are pretty thin for Republicans. I mean, they control the House and Senate, but the margins, and with some cabinet secretary picks last week, those margins may be getting thinner. So, my sense is you already have about 14 or 15 or so House Republicans who have already said in a letter to Speaker Johnson that they support retaining a lot of the IRA because it's helping their districts. You could have those Republicans speak up and say, hey, this tax credit is spurring this battery plant in my district, for example. There's a Republican Congressman Carter from Georgia who has a Hyundai plant in his district. And he was telling us last week that, I get that Hyundai supports this tax credit, and it sounds like he's heard from them. So I think that you're going to have more and more in the coming weeks, specific lawmakers on the Republican side speak up and say, maybe we don't, repeal this or we don't limit this because it is helping my district. So I think that it will be a limited effect on the IRA, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a messy process where you're going to be, pulling up certain tax credits and having Republicans figure out, is this something we want to try to roll back or not? And, how do we factor this into the pay-fors?
And then not having a lot of margin for error just on the vote.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Victoria, what's 2025 look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, we will also be watching reconciliation pretty closely. There's been talk since before even we knew the election results last year of planning from, the House. Steve Scalise has been talking about reconciliation since I think the spring of this year. So, and healthcare has always been a part of that discussion, per my understanding. We'll see how much it actually plays into it, but like Daniel said, healthcare could also be a pay for. So some of those PBM reforms that I discussed. Also, another big thing is Medicare site neutral policy, basically equalizing payments between hospitals and outpatient departments. Right now, Medicare can pay a different amount depending on the location where someone gets treated between a hospital and somewhere else. So equalizing those payments is a really big pay for. And so people have said that could be something that could help offset some of those tax cut extensions. So that's definitely big. And then, of course, the other huge thing is that the ACA enhanced subsidies, those were enacted during the IRA. Those are expiring the end of 2025. So that basically means a lot of people are getting ACA plans now, or qualifying for ACA plans at pretty low premiums, some $0. So they're getting health insurance for really cheap. And that might expire at the end of, it is going to expire at the end of 2025. And will Republicans do anything about extending that? The traditional wisdom is basically no, because Republicans, don't really like the ACA. And also there's been a lot of talk, especially with the enhanced subsidies, of whether there's like some fraud going on, some people getting the subsidies that don't really qualify for them. There's a long history of Republicans not being big fans of the ACA in general. So, and trying to repeal it unsuccessfully. So,
where are we on repeal? Are we still doing repeal or not repeal?
That's a great question. I actually asked Speaker Johnson last week about that because he had made some comments on the campaign trail that were a little unclear of if he was open to repeal again. And when I asked him last week, he said no, we're not talking about ACA repeal. But he did say we do want some healthcare reform. But that's such a broad, general thing to say that it could be, you know, some of these reconciliation things that I talked about, or it could be chipping away at the ACA in some way as well. So I didn't get a chance to ask him a second question. So sure. But for now, we'll see. But I do think we need to consider that if President-elect Trump decided he wanted to try to repeal ACA again, and he's kind of been back and forth on the campaign trail about that, then Congress wouldn't have to take a crack at it.
Yeah. Some of the top questions, I know, Maria, you're next, but there's a pile of healthcare questions that have been upvoted the most. So Victoria, while I have you here, you want to tick through some of these real quick. The biggest one is, how do you expect the new Congress and the new administration to approach Medicare and Medicaid funding?
I mean, Trump has been pretty big about not wanting to touch Medicare. He's always kind of said that. I think Republicans know that's kind of a losing issue if you do try to touch Medicare. Seniors will be pretty unhappy with that. They don't want to lose benefits, or they don't want to, like, you know, have to wait longer to age into Medicare, which is, you know, there's different types of Medicare reforms that could save the government money, like, you know, upping the age when you qualify for Medicare, or, you know, cutting down some of the benefits and things like that. I don't think they would really want to do that. That seems pretty unpopular. But Medicaid definitely seems like that could be a potential target for a Republican trifecta. There's been a lot of plans going around, whether you're looking at the Republican Study Committee, whether you're looking at conservative think tanks like Paragon Health Institute. They have a lot of different ideas of how to basically save the government money by kind of reducing how much they're paying for Medicaid. So that could be, you know, implementing block grants, that could be implementing work requirements, you know, making people who are able-bodied have to work to qualify for Medicaid. That was something that was big during debt ceiling last year. They talked about Medicaid, bring back Medicaid work requirements. I think we could definitely see that again. So I think Medicaid is really one to watch.
Yeah. Two more really quick ones. How big a healthcare bill do you anticipate in the lame duck? I think you answered that. You do not anticipate a big one? I
do not anticipate a big one. I mean, I think I will say I don't think those decisions have been made really yet. I think from me talking to sources this past week, I do think it's kind of in the upper leadership, but it didn't seem like they had really decided. I've heard that, you know, Republicans kind of sent an offer over to the Senate, but the Senate hasn't really decided what they want to do. Obviously, Democrats are going to want to have a say. Democrats are probably, you know, going to want to have a bigger package. It's the last time Democrats will have the chance to really impact policy for 2 years at least. So, but I don't think decisions have really been made. But if I had to guess, I would say probably not.
Small. And then last one, any predictions on drug pricing reform in the new administration and Congress?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so Trump in his first administration was really big on drug pricing. That was kind of the consistent one health policy that he really cared a lot about. And, you know, he issued a lot of different executive orders that didn't quite go through when he was in office before. They kind of ran out of time, or they weren't the policy didn't quite work the way he wanted it to. Anyways, that was a whole different thing. But I do think that it's something Trump could revisit. But notable policy that he really cared about a lot was most favored nation, which is basically, you know, tying the price of drugs in the U.S. to the lower prices they have in other developed countries. He got rid of that proposal during pretty late into the campaign. Or at least took it off his website. And the campaign kind of was like, yeah, we're taking that off for now. So I don't know if that's something we'll see again, and I'm not sure. There's some PBM policies and stuff he had done before. We could see that again. And then, I mean, it's possible for this, you know, Republican trifecta in Congress. You know, Daniel talked a lot about IRA. I think it's possible they could try to reform some aspects of the IRA related to the drug price negotiations, but I would see that more as smaller reforms, like, you know, changing how long it takes for drugs to qualify. I'm not sure we would see like a full repeal of the negotiation. That's kind of my take on that.
Maria, let's get back to tech. Real quick, though, before 2025, tell me who's in the bad spot on your hamster wheel.
China. And they have been for a while, and they'll continue to be. And I think that's actually what's going to inform a lot of policy making in 2025 as well. It's one of the few areas of agreement on Capitol Hill across administrations. So we can expect more export controls, more, ways to limit sensitive technology going overseas. Beyond that, I think some big tech companies may also get caught up in the crosshairs of Congress next year, with Republican control continuing in the House and now also Republican control of the Senate. I think that this entire, this whole argument that conservative speech is censored online is going to really come up a lot. You can expect some hearings with some big tech CEOs. But as far as actually reforming, Section 230 and the ability of holding companies accountable for the speech on their platform, we also might see some more movement on that debate as well. That has been a really difficult thing to find consensus on historically, but even yesterday with the appointment or the nomination of Brendan Carr to lead the FCC, he's a big advocate for reforming Section 230 and repealing that. So we expect content moderation to be a really big issue next year as well. I'm also watching AI. It's going to be a real hands-off approach. Republicans are not interested in regulating AI companies. They want to make sure they're staying out of the way of innovation. We are expecting a report to come out at the end of this year from the House AI working group that is going to be pretty broad. We don't expect specific bills to be in there. So really the efforts that we saw under the leadership of Schumer, we expect to die down quite a bit.
Yep. Awesome. Let's throw open back to the questions. Here's one I'll jump ball for everybody, because I think it impacts your beats a little differently. Do you think Trump expects all of his nominations to go through, or is this an opening gambit? I think, Victoria, you have the most interesting beat when it comes to this. What's the latest on RFK Jr.?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm going to ask at the Senate votes tonight. The Senate was lucky enough last week that they were already gone when the RFK Jr. nomination came down, because it came down on Thursday, like late afternoon. So I think I'll have a better sense once I talk to some senators. But you did see some leading senators come out with statements after the news came out on Thursday, like Bill Cassidy, slated to be the chair of Senate Help Committee. He said something kind of like, I support RFK, a lot of his nutrition policies, and I want to hear about some of his other conservative policy ideas. So it wasn't a complete no, I won't vote for him, but it was also not a complete full-throated support either. So that was kind of interesting to watch. So I'm not sure. I mean, I've heard some people say that they think, maybe senators wouldn't want to vote for an Attorney General Matt Gaetz, but maybe they don't want to tank more than one nominee. So
which one gets tanked?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Say. When you come back from the Senate votes, we'll read you tomorrow. That's when you'll know.
Maybe, yeah, exactly.
Daniel and Maria, the nominees in your beat seem a little more straightforward. Any intel on any of those picks?
I mean, I would point out Marco Rubio's nomination is kind of an interesting one because, of course, we saw that Trump is now supportive of keeping TikTok in the United States. And Marco Rubio is someone who is a major China hawk and worked on legislation to ban TikTok as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see how he navigates those policy differences if, Trump doesn't change his mind again on TikTok. But that's one that was interesting when it came up.
Right. And we just got Chris Wright nominated over the weekend for the Energy Department. He comes from an oil company background. And I mean, as we've written about in recent days, I think on the energy front, maybe our nominees aren't as controversial and surprising as in other sectors, but I do expect there to be plenty of blowback from Democrats and climate groups on that pick. But I don't get any sense from Republicans that there's any kind of fissures within the party on those nominees.
Yep. Here's another broad question. This might maybe for Daniel, Maria. What are the potential impacts to federally funded R&D under a second Trump administration? Give that a jump ball to you two. What do you think, Daniel? You want to try first?
It kind of, yeah, sure. I mean, it depends on what type of R&D we're talking about. I mean, the Energy Department is largely a funder of energy technologies. It sets energy policy through money and sending out grants and loans. And so, national labs are largely, they function pretty autonomously from the political swings of the country. But, we'll certainly be watching the energy and water appropriations process to see if there's any major changes. And, you do have big programs at the Energy Department, like the Office of Clean Energy demonstrations that will likely be targets because they've been targets of Republicans earlier this year in spending bills. And that office has a portfolio, of hydrogen, nuclear, direct air capture, things like industrial demonstration projects in aluminum and steel. So it's a very wide-ranging office. And of course, that's in demonstrations which which come after R&D and before deployment. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think we're going to be watching that pretty closely, just given the DOE is such a research heavy agency.
Yeah, Maria, do you have any follow-up thoughts on that as well, maybe?
Hey, I just think this question is directly tied to the broader effort to make the government more efficient and maybe cut staff and cut budgets. And so, of course, that has the potential of impacting a lot of AI research and development. On the other hand, I have talked to sources in industry who actually view Elon Musk's influence as a sign that maybe AI R&D wouldn't be affected as much, because this is someone who maybe sees the value in advancing that technology. And it's also something that Republicans value. And so I think it'll have a lot to do with how much, they want to make the administration wants to make the government efficient, and weighing that against the goal of remaining competitive globally.
Yeah, Maria, let's stick with you. There's another AI question here. It's, how do you see the new Republican trifecta handling federal AI-related legislation moving forward? And I would throw an additional part into that, not just the Republican trifecta, but the trifecta, like you said, plus Elon Musk. How does that move the needle on how the party might take AI legislation next year?
I think there was a lot of talk over, AI transparency, algorithmic transparency to avoid bias. AI in the elections, AI and workforce. There were all sorts of issues that lawmakers on a bipartisan basis, particularly in the Senate, were gearing up to tackle. But now it's really all about how can we stay out of the way and make sure that regulation does not get in the way of innovation. And so that is how I see this playing out, is just no bills really moving unless they are bills to fund some research and development.
Got it. A couple energy ones here in the chat. Back for you, Daniel. What can we expect with offshore wind in the new administration?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps offshore wind was a better answer to the hamster wheel analogy, which I'm still wrapping my head around. But yeah, I mean, Trump has made no secret that he detests offshore wind and is planning to cancel offshore wind projects. And, given offshore leasing falls within his power and federal jurisdiction, I would certainly imagine that he's going to, at the very least, slow walk those projects, whereas the Biden administration was setting a goal for, I think it was 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So I think this adds to the industry's headwinds, pun intended, just given the fact that you have supply chain challenges and other issues going on with offshore wind. I think Trump's victory makes the industry just that much more challenging right now.
And then also on the energy topic, on energy policy, what's the prognosis for carbon capture and sequestration funding?
Yeah, so you've got, the 45Q carbon capture tax credit, which was passed as part of IRA. We're hearing that's likely not on the chopping block. It's something that, the fossil fuel industry really likes. They want to try to reduce their emissions while also keeping production flowing. And so we're hearing that that's likely safe, probably not going to get rolled back. So that could continue. You also have quite a bit of funding through the Energy Department. I think it was about $12 billion from the infrastructure law 3 years ago that the Energy Department received to fund carbon capture and direct air capture programs. And DOE is working on setting up direct air capture hubs, two of them in Texas and the Gulf Coast area that essentially sucks carbon from the atmosphere and attempts to store it. So there's probably still a lot of funding that will flow from that. But I mean, the big question is whether the technology can work at scale, whether you can get wells permitted to actually store the captured carbon and get the pipelines permitted to move the captured carbon. So there's a lot of policy questions that remain, but I think the funding is fairly safe at the moment.
Yep. And we are getting close to the full queue here. And so if people have more, make sure to put them in and we'll stick around and answer them more. But the last one I have in here is a little bit deeper, Maria, on AI, specifically policies relating to responsible AI, privacy, growth of AI sector, outside of deepfakes, which we feel is not disruptive. What more on responsible AI thoughts do you have there?
I'll take this piece by piece, I think. So on privacy legislation, I mean, we saw yet another Congress try to tackle this issue and fail again. Differences between the House and the Senate on, preemption, private right of action, the same issues that have kind of plagued federal privacy legislation efforts showed up again. We thought at the beginning of this Congress that AI was going to drive privacy legislation forward. The thinking was, with so much more data being used from consumers, this is going to propel lawmakers to pass federal privacy legislation, but they ended up not doing that. So those efforts could be renewed next year. I think in the lame duck, the bill that we saw come out of the Energy and Commerce Committee is pretty dead. In terms of growth of the AI sector, I think lawmakers are thinking of doing that by staying out of the way with regulations and funding research and development. And then in terms of deepfakes, we did see them come up in the election in a few instances, but they didn't end up being as disruptive as I think we were preparing for. That's not to say people are going to back off and not think of how future elections safeguards could be passed for them. But it was surprising to see, I think, in this cycle that they weren't more disruptive.
And on the AI thing, like you said, that's the counterpoint of that is China, which everyone dislikes. And so you're able to be mean to China by being nice to AI, I guess, is the way they view it.
Yeah, and you don't want, China to be more competitive in this space. And so you're going to basically cut off China from AI products is one approach. AI export controls are something that's a conversation that's really heating up right now. And then, making these companies' lives easier so that they can develop these products without many guardrails.
Awesome. A couple of energy ones coming back for you, Daniel. Let's see. The first one, what can we expect on the mining and critical metals front and adjacent industries like battery recycling?
Yeah, certainly. This is an area of bipartisanship in a lot of ways. So I think we're going to be watching. There are actually some critical minerals bills in the Natural Resources Committee on the House side this week, as well as the Energy and Natural Resources on the Senate side. So there are things moving on that front. I mean, I think you're going to see kind of more of a narrative around national security and trying to, shore up supply chains. And as Maria said earlier, like anti-China rhetoric and just looking at how do we wean off imports from other countries and make sure that we're getting our minerals from friendly nations or the US. So I think you are going to see a lot more emphasis on that, and maybe less for the reasons of sourcing minerals for clean energy and the environment and climate change, but you are going to see a push to try to speed up, permitting of mining and refining and other types of facilities that can get these critical minerals secured. And so that'll be definitely top of mind going forward. And it is an area of bipartisanship, both on the left and the right for maybe different reasons. And it's an opportunity to grow jobs in the US. So I think that's going to be a top priority.
Yep. And then another one, Daniel, for you. You touched on this a little bit, but here's a little broader on IRA. What can we expect for 30C charging infrastructure, tax credits, and EV incentives? We talked about the EV incentives, but I guess what's the charging infrastructure tax picture look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I'd ask about super recently, but I do think that that's maybe got a brighter future than the 30D tax credit. I mean, I think that there's a lot of demand for charging. I mean, one of the big questions around EVs and a lot of the consumer anxiety around EVs is just like not having the charging infrastructure. So, I haven't really heard as much pessimism about that tax credit and the effort to build out infrastructure in more places because it is such a problem for the industry and something that the industry is trying to move beyond. So I think I would see that continues, but it is a good question to ask, and I think we'll ask around about it.
We've got, I think, one more. Victoria, I'm sorry we don't have more hospital lobbyists here today with healthcare questions, but Maria, here's one for you. Will chips and science initiatives be affected?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of the people on this call probably heard when President-elect Trump threatened to roll back the CHIPS and Science Act, and that made big headlines. And then you had House Speaker Mike Johnson kind of walk that back and say there is no interest among Republicans to do something like that. And I think the theme of the next 4 years is going to be separating, rhetoric from actual policy decisions. The fact is the CHIPS and Science Act has been really successful in Republican and Democratic districts across the country. And checking in with lawmakers on the Hill, they don't feel a strong threat of the CHIPS and Science Act being rolled back for that fact. It is just very politically beneficial among their constituents. So if you ask me today, I would say no, I don't think that it's going to be discontinued.
So this sounds like the same as what Daniel said about the IRA. Once the money shows up in the district, the political winds change very quickly.
Yes.
Awesome. I think we got one more we can do. This is a Daniel one. Any insight into the Secretary of Energy nominees passed in geothermal and solar? How will that impact his leadership?
Right. Remains to be seen, but he has touted the fact that he's focused. He studied those things and worked in those industries, and also has a background and an interest in nuclear. So there's going to be. He's come out and said over and over again that, I'm not just an oil and gas guy. I'm not a Texas oil man. I support, on all of the above strategies. So I think like with the way that the Energy Department functions and with funding going out for all these different programs, you could see a bump in geothermal. There's not a lot of funding right now relative to other programs at the Energy Department for geothermal. So and I know that that's been a perennial complaint from the industry. So I think with more attention, and especially on the rising demand for power in the country from data centers and artificial intelligence, you are going to see more demand for like more different types of energy getting funding from the Energy Department. So that's what I would watch for. And I think that
the always on kind of element of geothermal and nuclear as opposed
right.
to
The 24/7 zero carbon, sources of power. Yeah.
All right, I think we're ready for a big finish, Victoria. Our favorite topic showed up in the chat. How will 340B be viewed in the new Congress and administration?
I love 340B questions. Someone must have known. So this is interesting because we have a new Senate Majority Leader, Senator John Thune for South Dakota, and he has been really big on 340B. He's part of the Senate Working Group of 6 that's been trying to kind of reform the program. They've been working, I think since last year, honestly, on kind of, hearing from stakeholders how the program needs to be changed. And then this year, they've been working on drafting legislation that actually would reform it, and kind of reforming like how many providers are able to get discounts, or what does a patient definition mean. Those are kind of, and we don't know because we haven't seen the legislation exactly what it says, but that's kind of been delayed. So it's something I've been really following this Congress. It's been delayed a couple of times. It seems like there was some Republican and Democratic disagreement, and now, there's also been other things going on this Congress, or when we got back from the election. Something I'm going to try to ask Thune about, if not this week and in the coming weeks, because I'm curious. I'm sure he's going to have a lot on his plate as the new Senate Majority Leader, but I'm sure this is a passion project of his. He loves when I ask him about it, so I'm sure he'll want to do something on it. I would assume, and he really wanted to do something this year, but I think maybe it's just got caught up in all the other election things and everything else that's going on. So yeah, I think I'll say, I'm not sure what the person who's asking what their industry perspective is, but from the lobbyist that I've kind of talked to about his view, it's like he is obviously he's really close with a lot of South Dakota hospitals, so perhaps a little more provider friendly, but I know that they've really been trying to make this bill really like kind of not super pharma or hospital friendly, but kind of an equal balance between the two, or at least that's the goal. And then over on the House side, past Energy and Commerce member, or about to be members that are about to leave, like Larry Bouchon, he had a 340B bill that was a little more pharmaceutical industry friendly. So kind of cracking down on how many providers are able to get discounts. Since he's leaving Congress, I'm not sure what might happen to that bill, or if there'll be someone else to kind of take up that mantle. And we're going to have new leadership in Energy and Commerce as well. We don't know who the new chair is, so I'm not sure how they might view the 340B program. That'll be something to watch for sure.
Awesome. A tremendous finish on our favorite topic. Daniel, Victoria, Maria, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks to the folks out there on the internet who joined us for all this. These were a lot of really great questions. Hope to do this again in the future. And let me pass the baton back to Darren to wrap things up.
Yes, thank you once again for everyone for attending, and thank you to Nick and team for sharing their insights. Just wanted to be mindful of everyone's time, so we'll wrap things up. Just a reminder, we will distribute the recordings in the next day or two, so keep an eye out for that. And if people had additional questions, how can they get in touch, or where can they follow the work of the Axios Pro team?
They can email me, nick@axios.com, and they should sign up for the Axios Pro newsletters. I will be more than happy to share a link to anyone who emails me for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you once again to everyone, and have a great day.